Welcome back, Xlice Frost, to another video. This time, I'd like to provide some general comprehensive advice for the most difficult portions of the new 2.0 Abyss, as well as some character and composition recommendations. This is not meant to be a step-by-step guide, rather a breakdown of mechanics and ways to approach them. Think of this as like general advice, similar to how I would normally approach account reviews, except for my general audience rather than a specific reviewee. Hopefully you gamers find this helpful in progressing through the end stages of the Abyss. I'll be covering 11.3, the Hypostasis Cubes, 12.1, the Samurais and Mirror Maiden, 12.2, the Lava Troll and Magu Kenki, and 12.3, the Ruin Avengers. After covering the specific stages, the second half of the video will be general character and composition recommendations. Let's begin. Okay, so first, let's take a look at 11.3. This is the double cube chamber. The first half is a cryo cube fight. It has its standard stall mechanics, with the Beyblade is probably the most annoying attack pattern. The Beyblade is blockable with geo constructs like Zhongli's pillar, and then you can stare it down while waiting for it to enter its vulnerable state. Pyro is your best friend for free access to melt procs and receives benefit from the 60% Pyro Ley Line that you can see here. During its recovery phase, all you need is 2 charge attacks on 2 of the cubes, and the remainder of the shield HP can be burned through Pyro skills. As an example, it takes 2 of the cubes plus 2 Bennet's to break. Don't be afraid to get close to the cube during its circular AoE moves that typically happen. And for the second half, we have the Pyro Cube. It has a requirement of breaking through its initial Pyro shield before being able to DPS it during its short 3 to 5 second window. Hydro Catalyst users are the most consistent and easiest to break the shield, of which we have Barber and Mona. Xingqiu is also an option, but requires this Q during a non-DPS phase. It's not optimal, but it's an option. For its attack patterns, pray you don't have to deal with this Bulldoze attack, because similar to the Cryo Cube's Beyblade, it's difficult to chase and basically no window to DPS. Pyro Cube's recovery stage requires 3 Hydro applications on each of its subcubes. Again, Hydro Catalysts are really straightforward to use here. Xingqiu is pretty limited in this particular case. After its recovery phase, it's free to DPS down to 0. Cryo damage has a 60% ley line buff here and free access to reverse melt procs. Hydro DPS are obvious go-to choices if you run them. The windows of opportunity for DPS are still limited though, so good luck. Alright, so that is a quick run through of 11.3, which is the cube phase. Now for floor 12. Before we get into the specifics for each chamber though, let's explain the ley line really quick, yeah? So, every 10 seconds, the stage switches between a high tide and a low tide energy phase. During high tide, any normal attack, skill, or burst that hits an enemy will generate particles with base 10 energy on a 2.8 second cooldown. These particles scale with energy recharge. Elemental skills will generate their own particles as usual. At most, during this 10-second phase, you can proc this up to 4 times. The first right when high tide shows up, basically at 0 seconds, then at every 2.8 seconds, giving 3 procs in 8.4 seconds. This gives you a 1.2 window to achieve basically quote-unquote all 4 procs, right? This high tide is the quote energy generation phase, unquote. Once capped on your Qs, you can either fire them off immediately or auto a bit for the Blessing of the Abyssal Moon. This grants 7% stacking defense decrease when you have full energy, up to 5 stacks, and lasts 10 seconds, the entirety of a tide phase. So at max stacks, you would achieve 35% defense decrease down here, which is roughly an 18 to 20% damage increase. Now, firing off both of your Qs immediately or autoing a bit for the Blessing of the Moon both have their advantages. So, both of these playstyles are both viable, autoing with max energy for the stacks or pre-gaining the energy while your Q is still up before low tide kicks in. So, low tide is the ideal period to have your Qs active. You cannot gain energy during this period, not even from your E's. Particles will fly to your characters, but your energy won't be filled. Each chamber will begin with high tide for 10 seconds and then cycle the loop. Okay, so now with both of the floor 12 ley line and the current Blessing of the Moon explained, let's move to the specifics of each chamber. Okay, so 12.1 first. This will likely be the most difficult chamber for most people to aim for 3 stars. First half is split up into 2 phases. The first is 3 roughly 200k HP Nobushi, and the second with 2 roughly 500 HP Kairagi. For the Kairagi, if one of them dies, the other one's next move will regen 50% of its max HP, so it's highly advised to kill them together. This brings the focus of 12.1 first half to AoE damage and try to group the enemies up as best as possible. For the Nobushi, the purple one, Kikoban, spawns at 9 o'clock and the only one that may begin his rotation with a ranged crossbow move, instead of immediately running into melee or dashing into melee range. So there's 2 ways to deal with this, right? First, staggering him in the beginning and running left puts him in dash range. The others will follow suit. Otherwise, the second is just going into the northern half of the stage at the beginning, letting the purple Nobushi crossbow and then jump later, first focusing the AoE damage on the other 2. In both cases, I'd recommend hugging the wall to reduce their movement space. Try to be north side when they die because the second phase Kairaki spawn in the north half. Now, for the second phase Kairaki, they're a bit easier to keep together, I recommend to keep hugging the wall, but be prepared for their enhanced attacks that deal very heavy damage. Besides that, aim to kill both nearly at the same time to prevent the survival from regenning. Lastly, around the center of the stage, there's an electro totem that sends out timed waves of an electro aura, which gives them over 50% damage reduction to all attacks. Pyro, Cryo, Hydro can all react to remove the debuff, but it'll take a couple reactions. Okay, so first phase of the second half, there are two roughly 300k HP Pyro Fatui next to each other. I recommend some form of crowd control to knock them out of their stealth. Second phase, we have two mage teleporters. The Mirror Maiden almost has 700k HP and a 300k HP Electro Mage. Crowd control is still very useful here as well. Now you can see that 12-1 second half has nearly 1.7 million HP total health pool, with all 4 enemies having some form of stall mechanic, either stealth or teleport. Combined with CC, I'd highly recommend forms of AoE damage to reduce this effective HP down. Now, general discussion on 12-1. Aiming for 3 stars in 12-1 will likely be the toughest challenge in this 2.0 Abyss rotation. Getting used to grouping 12-1 first half with sources of AoE damage will be the biggest time saver. If you're aiming for 3 stars, try to clear 12-1 first half in under 75 seconds. This will leave 105 seconds for the second half, which has more effective HP than the first half to chunk through given their stall mechanics. Crowd control and AoE damage are still your best friends here. Alright, let's move on to the more straightforward chambers, yeah? 12-2. So, the first phase is 2 mid-heroes. This is very straightforward. It's a standard DPS phase with no catch, right? The second phase is a roughly 700k HP Electro Lava Troll and a Hydro Abyss Mage. The Lava Troll will always generate its shield first and then charge at you. Save your Qs until the Lava Troll's post-charge is what I would recommend. Either you can run straight towards the Hydro Abyss Mage first, and the Lava Troll will charge over there, but it doesn't really matter because the Abyss Mage will also teleport. This is just a DPS check. Now, for the second half, this is a single target, roughly 1.2 to 1.3 million HP Magu Tanky DPS check. 10 seconds of immunity in the beginning as he stands up, but High Tide is still active, so you can still auto for orbs. Standard fight with his usual phases and attack patterns. And finally, 12-3, this is the Ruin Avengers chamber. So, for the first phase of the first half is a standard Ruin Hunter, roughly 500k HP sponge. The second phase is 3 Ruin Sentinels with roughly 500k HP each. 1 Jellyfish, 1 Crab, and 1 Triangle. AoE damage is much preferred here. Target the rightmost Sentinel, which is the Triangle, as the other ones are melee and will group up. Second half, the first phase is a standard Ruin Guard with roughly 600k HP. The second phase is again 3 Rune Sentinels with roughly 500k HP each. 2 of these snakes and 1 of the jellyfish. So the most consistent strat with the least RNG here is running to one of the snakes, because the jellyfish will always follow, and one of these snakes attacks as they burrow underground and pop back up to where you are. So hopefully that's the attack that you get, and you get an immediate AoE here. Besides that, it's pretty standard DPS check. Alright, now let's talk units and compositions I'd recommend. This is not an exhaustive list. Most DPS characters can carry their weight. AoE characters will shine more on 12-1 and 12-3. 12-2, Magu Tanky is the only oddball that is a single target DPS check. Not much to say for 11-3. Follow the Ley Line buff, providing 60% damage versus the Pyro and Cryo for the Cryo and Pyro Cube respectively. Hydro DPS is an obvious choice for Pyro Cube if you have one. So, for floor 12, I'm going to discuss the general options that apply for the entirety of the floor. 12-1 and 12-3 follow the same AoE recommendations, with 12-2 Magu Tanky being the oddball out, still looking for the same DPS check, but more single target focused. So, for 12-1 and 12-3, general forms of AoE are extremely valuable here. Nearly all of the 5-star DPS fit into this category, with the exception of Jean, who would be more beneficial for fall damage in 12-1 second half. Kazuha, Zhongli, Bennett are universal choices for both sides. Highly recommend adding them if you have them. I leave Venti and Sucrose and the previous mentioned Jean for the second half, as their hard CC is much more valuable against Fatuis. Standard Freeze, Melt, Vaporize, and Taser comps are all capable on both sides. The most important is maximizing groupage, which I've explained earlier. Keep in mind for the second half, the Fatui and Mirror Maiden have 50% corresponding elemental resistance. Power Agents have 50% Pyro Res, Electro Mages have 50% Electro Res, and Mirror Maiden has 50% Hydro Res. In general, AoE damage packs the biggest punch in both 12-1 and 12-3. So, 4-star characters that follow the High Tide, Low Tide synergy with high 20-second Q cooldowns and have high AoE potential are extremely valuable to invest in here. They were recommended before 2.0 Abyss, but now since the threshold for 36-star has been raised, with much more beefier enemy HP sponges, they shine even more. 4 stars like Xiangling, Beidou, Kea, Xingqiu, Rosario fall under this category. For those characters with 80 energy cost Q, namely like Xiangling, Beidou, Xingqiu, because of how High Tide works, it is less necessary to cap your recharge extremely high for those characters. I'd say 150 to 160% works decently well compared to the 180-200% that I would recommend in normal situations without a ley line like this. Now, 4-star Sucrose actually gets a special mention here because of her uniquely underrated capability of being a taser enabler. She is the only Anemo Catalyst user in the game currently, which grants her special access to free swirl procs with just her normal attacks. Combined with normal attack activators like Beidou and Xingqiu's Q, you can see where the DPS consistency comes from, both consistent electrocharge procs and hydro and electro swirls. Now, for composition building wise, I'd recommend one side focusing on a pyro-oriented composition like Melt or Vaporize, excellent for either half of floor 12. AoE is a plus. The other side, if you can enable it, a freeze or electrocharge oriented composition, excellent for either half of floor 12 as well. If you have both of these options available, I'd recommend pyro focus on the first half and freeze or electrocharge on the second half. This is just due to the second half having half the enemies with pyro res, namely the pyro agents, while none of the enemies have cryo resistance. If you're struggling with the first half, try out a freeze comp to first learn the grouping, and if your pyro comp is strong enough to bust through the pyro agents, you'll still be fine. If you're running Electrocharge as one of your compositions, you might not have Hydro units left for the Pyro side, so run Melt there with your Cryo characters. Now keep in mind, these are my quote meta recommendations for players trying to achieve more stars in the Abyss. In general, they will have less stricter weapon and artifact requirements than other characters, since their damage is optimized from high multipliers and consistent reactions. Most importantly though, please, play with the units that you enjoy playing. There's no rush nor competition to 36 stars as soon as possible. It's a challenge for a reason. And that about wraps things up. That covers most of the general advice, suggestions, character, and composition recommendations I would give for general account reviews focused on Abyss progression. I didn't really cover specific 5-star characters because they in general fall into the same composition categories that I mentioned with regards to Melt, Vaporize, Taser, Electrocharge, and general AoE compositions. If you gamers enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. It's free and it really supports the channel growth and I really appreciate it. I wish you gamers the best of luck on your Abyss progress and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.